The year is 2137. Humanity has never been one to sit still, bound by the limits of Earth. When the first faster-than-life engine roared to life, the stars were no longer distant lights, but stepping stones. The Terran Republic was forged in ambition, a testament to resilience after centuries of war, strife, and rebuilding. The scars of Earth's past still linger in history books. Nations that once stood divided, now united under a single cause: survival among the stars. New Terra, one of humanity's furthest colonies, stands as a beacon of what they have achieved. Cities gleam under artificial atmospheres, towering structures built from the soil of alien worlds. The planet is self-sustaining, a frontier world that represents the best of human ingenuity and perseverance. Technology advanced rapidly in the face of necessity. Faster-than-light travel allowed humanity to spread like wildfire, pushing into the great unknown. The void is cold and indifferent, but humans have always found ways to adapt, to endure. The Zexith Dominion has ruled the stars for millennia, its influence spanning across thousands of conquered systems. Their empire was built on fear, ruthless, efficient, and absolute. To the Zexith, all other species exist only to serve or be eradicated. Their fleets descend upon worlds like locusts, leaving only ashes and submission in their wake. The Zedzites do not negotiate, they do not compromise. When they expand, it is not with the hope of discovery, but the certainty of conquest. The weaker species they have crushed never resisted for long. Those who did were reduced to whispers of extinction, remnants scattered in the void. To them, humanity is nothing more than another upstart species, an inconvenience in their inevitable dominion. But unlike the others, humanity has an advantage that the Zigzith cannot understand: the ability to fight with nothing left to lose. Captain Elias Kane has fought in more battles than he cares to count. He was there when the Zexith glassed the colony of Cerberus IV, watching helplessly as millions burned. Every decision he makes carries the weight of those he could not save. He has lost too much to hesitate now. His crew follows him not just out of duty, but out of unshakable belief. He is a man who does not break, a commander who stands between extinction and survival. Yet he is still human. Tired, burdened, carrying ghosts that whisper in the silence of space. Leadership is a cruel burden. The choices he makes in the coming days will determine the fate of an entire species. Dr. Celine Voss has spent her life trying to bridge the gap between species. A xenobiologist, a linguistics expert, an optimist in a universe that does not forgive hope. She once believed that diplomacy could prevent war. But she has seen the transmissions, the ruins of civilizations that once sought peace with the Zexith. She knows now that some enemies do not come to the table to talk, they come to take. Still, part of her clings to the idea that knowledge is humanity's greatest weapon. If there is a weakness in the Zexith, she will find it. Lieutenant Mac Holloway is a fighter pilot, reckless and relentless. His home, his family, was erased in the first Zex-6 assault. He never got to say goodbye. There is no mercy left in him, only the cold determination of a man who has nothing left to lose. He flies not out of duty, but for revenge. Every enemy ship he takes down is another step closer to justice. Kane tries to keep him in check, but war has a way of breaking people in different ways. Some, like Mac, only know how to keep fighting. High Warlord Zalvora has conquered 100 worlds. Humanity is just another name to be erased from the galactic records. He has studied them, watching their irrational stubbornness, their refusal to submit, their pathetic belief in defiance. But it does not matter. Their resistance only prolongs the inevitable. He has no hatred for them, no personal vendetta. Humanity is simply an obstacle, one that must be crushed beneath the weight of the Dominion. His fleet is already en route to New Terra, and when he arrives, the only choice humanity will have left is how they wish to die. New Terra thrives under a bright sun, its cities a mixture of old Earth architecture and advanced frontier design. Farms stretch beyond the colony walls, feeding the millions who call this world home. Children laugh in the streets, markets bustle, life flourishes. They do not know that death is already on its way. In orbit, defense satellites scan the void, automated systems keeping watch. The Terran fleet is stationed above, running drills, preparing for an enemy that has yet to arrive. They do not realize that time is already against them. For many on New Terra, it is a day like any other. They go about their lives, unaware that the last peaceful sunrise has already passed. The Zegzith fleet emerges from FTL, their warships appearing like silent specters in the sky. The horizon darkens as the first dreadnoughts descend, their colossal forms blocking out the sun. A transmission cuts through all channels. Cold, unwavering. Your species will surrender immediately. Resistance will not be tolerated. The ultimatum is met with silence, then panic. Civilians freeze, staring upward at the impossible sight. Soldiers rush to their stations, alarms wailing across the city. Humanity has always known war, but never like this. The Council of Nations gathers in emergency session. Some argue for negotiation, but the intercepted messages tell the truth. The Zegzith do not offer peace, only enslavement and extermination. There is no surrender that does not end in shackles, no truce that does not lead to genocide. They have seen what happens to those who yield. Their only option is to fight. The Terran fleet mobilizes, warships aligning into defensive formations. Fighter squadrons launch, streaking through the sky as ground defenses come online. In the command center, Kane stands before a holographic war map, studying the Zegzith fleet. Outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched. Selene watches the chaos unfold, the war she had hoped to avoid now inevitable. Mac grips the controls of his fighter, jaw clenched. The only thing in his mind is vengeance. The Zeth came expecting submission. Instead, they would face humanity's unrelenting fury. The Zegzith fleet emerged from FTL like a swarm of locusts, blotting out the stars above New Terra. Their colossal warships, black as the void, hung in orbit, casting shadows across the planet's surface. No warning, no diplomacy, just an incoming transmission laced with contempt. Your species will surrender immediately. Resistance will not be tolerated. Panic rippled through the streets. People froze, staring at the sky, where the artificial dawn of the orbital colonies had suddenly vanished. Alarms wailed, civilians ran for shelters, defense installations scrambled to bring weapons online. But the Terran fleet already knew the truth. There would be no surrender. The Zegzith struck first. Without hesitation, their battle cruisers opened fire, unleashing planet-cracking energy blasts upon New Terra's orbital defenses. The first impact obliterated a Terran battleship, tearing through the hull like paper. Flaming wreckage spun away, debris scattering into the void. "Return fire!" Kane's voice cut through the chaos. Missiles launched, railguns roared. The New Terra defense fleet retaliated, but the enemy was overwhelming, their advanced shielding deflecting most human attacks. One by one, Terran ships erupted into fireballs, their crews lost in the abyss. But humanity had never won wars with numbers. They fought with strategy, desperation, and sheer refusal to die. The UNS Tempest, a battle-scarred destroyer, tore through the battlefield, weaving between Zegzith fire. Kane gripped the command chair, barking orders as the ship's cannons unleashed rail slugs at impossible velocities. "Target their shield generators, find me a weakness." Explosions rippled across the Zegzith frigate as Kane's crew exploited a gap in its defenses. But the Tempest's shields were failing, plasma bolts scorching the hull. If they stayed much longer, they'd be another burning corpse drifting in the void. Evasive maneuvers, Kane roared. Retreat was not an option, but neither was dying like a dog in space. The fighter squadrons launched, tiny human ships soaring into the inferno. Mac Holloway's hands gripped the control stick of his interceptor, eyes burning with rage. "Stay tight. Follow my lead," he commanded. They were outmatched. Zegzith warfighters had superior tech, greater speed, better armor, but Mac had nothing left to lose. "Form up on me. Break their formation." The squadron weaved through plasma fire, dancing between enemy cannons. One wrong move meant instant death. Mac pushed his thrusters to max, slipping between two Zegzith interceptors before rolling hard right, launching a missile straight into an enemy engine core. The battleship exploded. Zelian Voss wasn't in a cockpit. She was in a communications bunker deep beneath New Terra's surface, watching it all unfold. The fleet was dying, the planet was burning, and the people, her people, were afraid. She grabbed the nearest transmitter, patched into every remaining channel, and spoke. "This is Zelian Voss. To every fighter, every soldier, every civilian, listen to me. We are not slaves. We are not prey. If they want our world, they will have to burn for it." Her words rippled across the fleet, through every Terran stronghold. And suddenly the dying fight became something else entirely. Zalvora watched the battle unfold from his command deck, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. The humans were still fighting. They should have broken by now. Every other species had. Yet these creatures did not flee. They did not kneel. They fought like cornered predators. His amusement twisted into fury. This was not how it was supposed to go. "Burn their cities," he ordered, voice calm. "Leave nothing standing." From orbit, the Zegzith dreadnoughts tilted downward, weapons locking onto the surface of New Terra. Then, hellfire rained down. The first blast vaporized an entire city block. The next turned forests to ash, shattered mountain ranges, left behind craters where life had once thrived. Buildings crumbled. Millions screamed. Terror rippled through the remaining strongholds. Kane saw the planet burning beneath him and felt his hands tighten into fists. New Terra was dying, but its defenders were not finished. He patched into the fleet-wide comms. "All ships, hold the line." His destroyer surged forward, tearing into the enemy formation, a single warship defying an entire empire. Mac dove through the debris field, plasma bolts streaking past his hull. His squadron was nearly gone. Half his pilots were dead, but he still had one last shot. He lined up his sights, targeting the Zegzith flagship's command array. "For my family," he whispered. Then he fired. Selene was trapped. The bunker ceiling collapsed, fire and rubble surrounding her. She could barely move, but she still had her transmitter. She wasn't done. Even as the walls cracked, even as death loomed, she kept broadcasting. Humanity does not kneel. Zaldora watched his warships burning, the humans fighting beyond reason. He had never seen this before. Every species before them had submitted or died quickly. Not these creatures. "If they will not submit," he whispered, "then we will eradicate them all." The battle wasn't over, but humanity would not break. They came expecting fear. Instead, they found hellfire. The remnants of the New Terra Defense Force barely made it out alive. What was once a flourishing colony had been reduced to a burning wasteland, its skies choked with ash and wreckage. The survivors retreated to an abandoned mining station on the planet's dark side, hidden deep beneath miles of frozen rock. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Low rations, battered ships, wounded soldiers barely hanging on. Kane stood over a holographic war map, staring at the fleet's crippling losses. There were no reinforcements, no backup. Mac sat on a crate, helmet in his lap, eyes hollow with grief. He had lost too many friends today. Celine, tending to the wounded, knew the fight wasn't over. Kane clenched his fists. They hadn't lost, yet. They had no chance in a straight fight, so Kane did what humanity had always done best. He got creative. "Hit and run," he murmured, studying the Zexi fleet's tight formation. "Make them think we're everywhere. Make them bleed for every inch." He called it Operation Hellstorm. The goal? Turn the war asymmetrical. Kane's forces would become shadows in the void, striking hard and vanishing before the Zedzith could retaliate. Human unpredictability against Zexthic discipline. A battle of strategy over brute force. Mining drones, once used for harvesting asteroid ore, were repurposed as weapons of war. Engineers reprogrammed them to redirect massive space debris, turning New Terra's shattered orbit into a minefield of destruction. The first wave caught the Zexith off guard. Uncontrolled asteroid storms tearing through their fleet. Ships crumpled under the impact, their shields useless against mile-wide boulders hurled like ancient weapons. The Zexth expected warships, not the very battlefield itself, turned against them. Stealth frigates, equipped with experimental cloaking technology, drifted in the darkness of space, invisible to Zedzith scanners. One moment, nothing. The next, a Zexith warship exploded, its engines shattered by precision torpedoes. Before enemy reinforcements arrived, the frigates vanished, leaving only wreckage behind. The Zexth scrambled to recalibrate their sensors, but it was futile. Humans fought in ways they had never encountered before. Kamikaze drones, no larger than a fighter cockpit, latched onto Zexith hulls and detonated in brilliant bursts of fire. AI-controlled fighters, programmed with unpredictable attack patterns, baited Zexith warships into killing zones where hidden missiles awaited them. It was a war of adaptation, and the Zexith, for all their technological supremacy, were struggling to keep up. Deep within the mining base, cyber warfare specialists broke into the Zexith's communications. They hijacked transmissions, filling enemy channels with false orders and conflicting reports. A single hacked distress signal lured 3 Zedzith cruisers into an ambush, where hidden human torpedoes tore them apart. Kane's hackers spread disinformation, causing infighting among enemy ranks. The Zedzith, so reliant on precise coordination, were turning on each other. Celine worked in isolation, brewing a different kind of weapon. The Zexith relied on cybernetic enhancements, their officers linked through biomechanical neural interfaces. She engineered a virus, one that wouldn't just infect their systems, it would infect them. The first symptoms were glitches in the implants, missed commands, involuntary muscle spasms. Then came seizures. Finally, ships losing control as their own officers collapsed at their stations. Panic spread through the Zexith ranks as their own bodies betrayed them. Victory had a price. Mac's squadron was cut in half, their desperate assaults taking a toll. Kane had to decide. Pull back and save what was left, or keep pushing and risk losing everything. Celine, caught midway through sabotaging a Zexthite power relay, was captured. But she didn't break. Even in restraints, she smiled. The war was still being fought. Aboard the Zedzith flagship, Celine was bound in bioluminescent restraints, staring at the towering guards around her. They thought she was helpless. She wasn't. She had already started the upload. Lights flickered, weapons malfunctioned, the ship's systems glitched, misfired, went dark. The virus spread like wildfire, crippling the Zeke's most powerful warship. Humanity's silent strike from within. A captured Zedzith officer, thrashing against his bonds, snarled through bared fangs. "You don't understand," he spat. "We are the Dominion. Our empire cannot fall." Cain crouched before him, watching his reptilian eyes flicker with fear. "Then tell me," Cain said, "why are your ships in chaos?" The officer hesitated. "Our hive mind command," he muttered. "It cannot function without the warlord." Cain's expression turned to stone. "Without Zalvora, the entire invasion collapses." Cain gathered his best soldiers. Mac loaded his last magazine. Celine, even bruised, smiled through gritted teeth. They had one chance. Infiltrate the Eternal Wrath, Hexavora's flagship, and assassinate the warlord. A suicide mission, but humanity's only shot at survival. The war was coming to an end, one way or another. The Eternal Wrath loomed before them, a leviathan of war, its blackened hull bristling with weapons, scars of battle visible along its length. Using stolen Zegzyth access codes, Cain's strike team bypassed external defenses, slipping through a maintenance docking bay, unnoticed. Inside, the ship pulsed with alien energy, its corridors organic yet mechanical, the walls seemingly alive. The air was thick, heavy, hostile to human lungs. Every breath felt like inhaling something unnatural. Cain signaled his team forward, weapons at the ready. One wrong move meant instant death. They were deep in enemy territory, and the Zegzyth could smell their fear. Mac Holloway's hands tightened around his controls. His squadron was outnumbered 10-1, but they had one job: keep the Zegzyth fleet distracted long enough for Cain's team to reach their target. Explosions lit up the darkness. His wingmen fell one by one, but they kept flying, kept fighting. Mac's interceptor twisted through the chaos, narrowly dodging a Zegzyth warship's turret fire. Every second they survived was another second Cain's team had to kill Zalvora. Zelin Voss was bound, bruised, but not broken. The Zegzyth interrogator loomed over her, his claws glistening with fresh blood. "You are a scientist," he sneered. "Weak, fragile, why resist?" Zene smiled, despite the pain. "Because you're too stupid to break me." The moment the guard turned to grab his next instrument, she struck, snapping his neck in a single, brutal motion. His body hit the floor with a sickening crunch. Selene freed herself, slipping into the ship's guts. Her war had just begun. Celine crawled through maintenance shafts, the cold metal pressing against her torn uniform. Sparks flickered as she hacked into the reactor control systems, fingers flying across the interface. The ship's lights flickered, alarms blaring as power surges cascaded through the corridors. The Eternal Wrath itself rebelled against its crew. Security systems glitched, doors refused to open, weapons misfired. The Zegzyth officers shouted in confusion, unaware that their own ship was betraying them. Cain and his team pushed through enemy forces, gunfire echoing through the labyrinthine corridors. Zeg's warriors fell in their path, but there was no time to celebrate. The command deck loomed ahead. The door slid open, and there he was. Zalvora, High Warlord of the Dominion, clad in darkened armor, his clawed hands gripping a massive blade. "You should have surrendered," he rumbled. Cain raised his combat knife. "We don't do surrender." The two warriors clashed. Zalvora's blade tore through metal like air, each swing enough to cleave a man in two. Cain dodged, countered, his knife finding chinks in the warlord's armor. Every strike Cain landed, Zalvora laughed. "You fight like a dying animal," the warlord taunted, his wounds leaking dark, viscous blood. Cain spat blood onto the floor. "Funny thing about animals," he said. "Corner them, and they tear your throat out." With a final, brutal strike, Cain buried his blade deep into Zalvora's chest. The warlord gasped, shock in his reptilian eyes. "Your kind will die screaming," he choked. Cain leaned in, eyes burning. "We don't fear you. We never did." With a final twist of the blade, Zalvora fell, dead. The hive mind command network collapsed in an instant. Across the fleet, Zegzite officers staggered, confused, leaderless. Some ships broke formation and fled, others turned on one another, confusion spreading like wildfire. The invincible armada was now a leaderless horde. Mac's fleet, battered and on the verge of collapse, rallied. The Terran forces pushed forward, their rage burning hotter than plasma fire. The Zexith had come expecting weakness. Instead, they had found humanity's wrath. The eternal wrath was dying. Selene had seen to that. Desperate, the flagship lurched forward, its remaining thrusters firing on full burn, aimed directly at New Terra's surface. A final act of spite. Selene, barely able to stand, finished her last command override. The reactor overloaded. She smiled as she whispered into the comms, "Burn in our fire." The Zexith dreadnought erupted in a cataclysmic explosion, the shockwave tearing through space, taking dozens of enemy ships with it. The Dominion's symbol of power, its greatest warship, was gone. A message, written in fire and wreckage, spread across the stars. Humanity does not kneel. Kane, Mac, and Selene stood aboard the last surviving warship, watching the remains of the Zexith fleet scatter into the void. They had won. But at a cost. Victory had changed them, and the galaxy would never be the same. The fires had finally died, but the smoke still clung to the air like a ghost. New Terra was in ruins. Once proud cities had been reduced to ash, their towering skylines now nothing more than twisted metal and broken stone. Entire districts had been glassed by orbital bombardments, leaving behind charred wastelands where families had once thrived. The silence was unbearable. Survivors emerged from underground shelters, eyes blinking against the sun that had been stolen from them by the Zetswath war machine. They walked among the wreckage, searching for loved ones, homes, anything that remained of their old lives. And yet, through all the destruction, humanity still stood. Bloodied, beaten, but undefeated. The Zeth Dominion was broken. Across the war-torn battlefield of space, the once mighty armada now drifted aimlessly, leaderless, confused. The hive mind that had bound them together was gone. Without Zalvora, their warlord, the remaining fleets had no coordination, no direction. Some ships fled into the void, running from the battle they had once been so certain they would win. Others turned on each other, their hierarchy shattered beyond repair. The empire that had ruled through fear, the dominion that had enslaved species for millennia, had been brought to its knees by a single species. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Humanity had won. Victory always carried a price. The cost of survival was counted in bodies and broken souls. Entire families had been erased, their names now only memories carried by the few who remain. Kane walked through the shattered ruins of New Terra, his eyes dark, his face lined with sorrow. He had won the battle, but he knew this was only the beginning. War had changed them, and it would not be the last fight they would face. Mac stood apart from the others, gazing up at the scarred sky. He could still see the flash of exploding warships if he closed his eyes, still hear the screams of his fallen squadmates in the silence that followed. Victory was hollow when there was no one left to celebrate it with. The last surviving Zexith warships limped through space, their once mighty fleet a shadow of its former strength. The survivors among them, once the lords of conquest, were now fragments of a fallen empire. Then the transmission came. A single human voice cut through their fractured comms, calm, cold, and terrifyingly clear. "We were never your prey." The words echoed through their fleet. The message was received not just by the Zexites, but by every species across the known galaxy. The same species they had once dismissed as weak had just brought their empire to its knees. Now, The name of humanity was whispered in fear, respect, and something dangerously close to reverence. The galaxy was changing. In the wake of the Zeth's humiliating defeat, stories spread like wildfire. Tales of human warriors who fought like demons, who did not break even when the sky fell and the ground burned. Survivors from conquered species began to rise, inspired by the fireborn race that refused to kneel. Rebellions flared across former Zedzith-occupied worlds, each uprising carrying the same battle cry. Humanity fights, humanity wins. No longer just an upstart species, humans were now something more. A legend, and legends spread. Cain stood atop the wreckage of a fallen Zexith warship, the burning remains of New Terra reflected in his hardened gaze. The war was over, but peace? That was something humanity would never take for granted again. He turned toward the survivors, the soldiers, the leaders of the future, and spoke, his voice carrying across the ruined battlefield. You come for humanity, be ready for war. He looked up at the sky, now clear of enemy warships, the vast, endless void stretching before them. We don't break. His hands curled into fists. We burn. The war had ended, but humanity had been reborn, and the stars would never be the same. The shockwaves of humanity's defiance echoed across the galaxy. The Zexith Dominion, once an unchallenged empire, now faced rebellion on multiple fronts. Worlds that had suffered under their rule for centuries rose up, emboldened by humanity's victory. The impossible had happened. The invincible had fallen. For the first time in millennia, the Zexith war machine was crumbling. Once loyal vassals turned against their former masters, striking at supply lines, ambushing weakened garrisons. Fear, the Dominion's greatest weapon, had turned against them. And at the heart of it all, whispered from one world to the next, was the legend of humanity, the species that refused to kneel. The galaxy held its breath. Some alien civilizations, watching the fall of the Zex Dominion, saw an opportunity. Delegations arrived with carefully worded treaties, eager to forge alliances with the Terran Republic. These species saw humanity's resilience and wanted to stand beside them. Others feared what humanity had become. The sheer ferocity of their defiance, their willingness to fight to the last breath, had unsettled many. Once dismissed as primitive upstarts, humans were now seen as something else entirely. A force of nature, unpredictable and unstoppable. Across the stars, one question loomed. Was humanity a new power of salvation or a rising storm of destruction? Among the ruins of New Terra, 3 survivors stood in the shadow of a fallen Zexith warship. Cain's uniform was torn, stained with blood, his eyes fixed on the broken horizon. The weight of victory sat heavy on his shoulders. This war was won, but he knew it would not be the last. Celine, leaning against a twisted beam of wreckage, exhaled slowly. She had fought for survival, but the battle had changed her. No longer just a scientist, now something more. Mac, battered and scarred, stood apart, gazing at the silent sky. His war had started with revenge, but now, it was about something bigger. They had won, but they were no longer just survivors. They were the vanguard of something new. In the darkness of deep space, human warships moved like predators waiting in the abyss. The Terran Republic, once dismissed, was now feared. The once scattered colonies had become a unified force, standing as equals among the stars. No longer the hunted, now the hunters. The message was clear. Humanity would never surrender, never kneel. They had fought in fire and survived. The final transmission from New Terra echoed through the galactic network, a single message sent to every species, every empire, every ruler who had once doubted humanity's strength. Documents